Okay, now let's look at the tensioning setup of a Schacht Standard Floor Loom. This is actually really similar to what you see on the Schacht Wolf looms as well. Uh, the tensioning system, the brake system, is as important as the shafts and the jacks and lambs because the tensioning allows you to warp your loom and then weave off the warp into cloth. So I'm on the right side of the loom, looking at it from the front, and because this is on a shack loom, this is where everything happens. It's on the right side of the loom, and I want to start with what we're seeing right here. So this is the cloth beam. As you create cloth, it winds onto this beam, and in fact, the front of the warp ends get attached to this apron bar. You might say, why have an apron bar when you could just tie stuff right onto the cloth beam? And it's actually a very simple answer. First, you would lose a lot more weaving length if you tried to tie around this honkin' big thing. Second, the position of this beam would be really problematic. And lastly, what you want on a warped loom is so here's the beater. You want your warp ends coming from the heddles through the reed on the beater, and then you want them to go over this front beam. These are all places that kind of help even out the tension of your warp as you're doing the process. So you tie onto the apron bar, which is connected to the cloth beam. There are two other really important parts of this system. And again, sorry for these awkward angles. It's trying to do this with one hand is a little tricky. Okay, this ratchet gear on the cloth beam, you can see its teeth. You can see that it is a gear because you don't want this in free rotation while you're weaving. You want it held into place. So what holds it into place is a ratchet dog, and you can see how the metal part on the ratchet dog just sits in one gear. And once it's in place, the cloth beam cannot roll forward. However, it can roll backward unless which is what you want. So let's say you're weaving, 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 and you need to advance your warp. You can use this ratchet advance lever to tighten things up. And this is what you do. You release the brake and tighten things up with this ratchet advance lever. Let me show you what the brake pedal looks like. Okay, so here I am at the front of the loom. This is the front leg, and this is the beam that holds the leg, the side of the loom. Here's the ratchet advance lever. It's sitting on this little peg, and this right here is the brake pedal. So when you press this, it's going to release the tension at the back of the loom, and then you can tighten up your warp. And I want to show you one last thing, because this is, again, another one of those useful details that Barry always thinks about when he's designing a loom. This is what's called the brake stop. So if you needed, while you're warping your loom, to lock the brake pedal in place, you could, if you had two hands or a foot available, you could set this brake stop so that it just locks that brake pedal down. And you often need to do this in the warping process. And then you can let it out. Okay, so this is what's going on at the front of the loom. Oh, and I want to point out this handy dandy little feature. It's again, one of these simple little things that makes a huge difference when you're warping. So let's say you have threaded all your heddles and now you need to thread your reed. In times past, I used to use string to tie my beater in the position I wanted so I could see where the warp ends were coming from the heddles, and I could put them into the reed in the right order. But the beater pin makes that unnecessary. So the beater pin fits into this slot, and when you fit it into this hole in the upper right leg, which can be a little tricky, as you can see. Again, this is a lot easier when you've got two hands and are not, trying to make videos that the whole world can see. Now, the beater is held at the perfect distance for seeing what you're doing. And in fact, if you raise the seat on your loom bench or put some cushions on, which is a great thing to do, if you don't have a seat where you can raise and lower its height, you're missing out. So now everything's in a clear position, and I don't have strings to hold the beater in place. I have strings for other reasons, but that's a different story. Okay, at the back of the loom, you can see the brake mechanism. And fortunately, if something goes wrong on the brake system of your Schacht Standard Floor Loom or Wolf Loom, it's actually not that hard to replace this whole cable setup. So we've seen the front end of the brake pedal, which rises at the front of the loom on a standard floor loom. On a Wolf loom, the brake release pedal looks just like any other treadle, except it doesn't have slots in the back. And you just have to be careful not to hit the brake pedal when you think you're hitting a treadle. It's connected with cables and springs and this brake bar thing, so that when you press on the brake pedal, everything loosens up around here. This cable is really important. And when you need to tighten things up from the back, which is most likely to happen either during warping or when you've advanced your warp too much at the front end of the loom, I do this all the time, you use this warp beam crank handle. So this brake hub, as it's called, with the brake cable on it, this is the warp beam of the loom. And again, notice how there's an apron bar that has Texel cords, and these are tie-ups that I use to actually connect bundles of warp ends to the warp beam. When you, this is all, again, part of the tensioning system. So as you're warping the loom, you're likely to put this warp beam crank handle on its nut and turn things and see what's happening. The apron bar is whooshing around and things are falling off. But imagine that this is a really long warp and not, 8 inches of unwoven warp. And you would see that this is what's tightening everything up. And when you're weaving, and this is really important, you want to make sure that this warp beam crank handle is not sitting on the nut, because it adds weight to this side of the warp beam that the other side of the warp beam does not have, and that can cause wonkiness in your weaving. So this is the tensioning system, and if you are noticing that your loom is not holding tension, Schacht's website has all the repair parts you could ever want to repair the tensioning system, the brake system, on any Schacht loom. I know this because I put all those parts up on the website myself. So there you have it. These are the basic parts of any loom. You've got shafts that go up and down to make your shed. And then you've got warp beam and cloth beam at the front of the loom that hold the threads under tension in a parallel to the floor. That's the word I need. Parallel to the floor. And then you've just got the frame of the loom, keeping everything else steady, just keeping everybody square. Because, for instance, if your beater is not square to the front beam of your loom, you're going to have cloth where the weft beats in at an angle, and you don't want that. You will always want everything to be square and parallel. And in fact, if you've ever sewn anything from purchased fabric, if you took home ec back in the days when that was still a thing, you will know that the first thing your home ec sewing teacher taught you was how to identify the selvages, the length of grain, and then how to cut a strip off so you would have an even line on the width of the grain, the widthwise grain. And these were important factors in laying out your pattern pieces. So those are the parts of the loom.